Hi guys, in this video I'm going to explain you how the layer masks work, okay? So we are not going to start by creating a new document. Remember, we only do this to start a new composition. But this time, since we are going to edit the pictures, we just need to open them, okay? So you can use your Finder to find the picture that you are going to edit. You do right click, open with, and you choose Adobe Photoshop, or if you are already in Photoshop, you just click in open, or you can go to file open, okay? Or the shortcut command O. So once you're there, you will search for the image that you are going to use, which I have over here. Hold on, where did I leave it? Here? I'm going to use the one called Geode, this one over here, okay? So we are just going to open the image directly in Photoshop. Now, one thing that you notice here is that when we open the image, Photoshop creates a background layer, okay? So to continue editing this work, I am going to convert it into a smart object, okay? So we are going to do right click and convert this layer to smart object. Now, I am not going to rasterize the layer because we are now learning how to work with non-destructive editing. That means that I am not going to directly manipulate the pixels of this image. Let me explain you the difference. I am going to create a duplicate of this layer. One is a smart object, the other one is I rasterize the layers so I can manipulate this image. Now, if I want to remove the background from this image, we can use any of the selection tools we already worked with, right? In this case, I will be using my quick selection tool to select the geode, which, let me do this really fast. We already know how to do this, right? So something like that is, I think, okay. And let me press Alt to get rid of this part over here. Now, that's a decent selection, right? I have all my geode selected, and I'm currently working in the rasterized layer. Now, the next steps that we learned was to go to Select and Mask, to adjust or to refine the edges of my selection just so that they don't look super weird. Remember, this is a good practice to work with refinement options so our selections are better. And then, since I want to remove the background, I need to invert my selection, right? Because I started by selecting my object. And then we press delete, we deselect, and this is how can I remove the background from my geode. Now, as you can see, I completely deleted the pixels. That means that I cannot bring them back. So if I made a mistake that I cut more than I wanted from my object, I need to go back in my history, okay, to undo that, or I need to remove this layer and place my image again. That is called as, or is known as, destructive editing because we are manipulating the pixels directly. Now, I will repeat the same process, but this time I will do it on a smart object. This means that if I want to edit this, for example, I want to take the paint bucket or I want to delete this one. Let me do the selection again. I have the selection here, but I'm currently working in my smart object. So if I want to delete this one, Photoshop tells me that I cannot directly edit this work. This is what we want. Now we are going to work with non-destructive editing. So I will repeat the process. I will invert my selection. I will go to Select and Mask. I will refine my selection, the same thing that I did before, but this time, instead of pressing Delete, what I'm going to do is to add a mask. And this mask will hide the pixels instead of deleting them. How can we do that? We have several options. The first one, after you create your selection, when you go here to Select and Mask, and after you apply the pertinent global refinement options. Here in the bottom, in the output settings, we have the output to option. And we have selection, layer mask, new layer with mask, etc. We are going to work with layer masks. So instead of choosing selection, I will click in layer mask and then click OK. And as you can see, we already have a mask happening here. But let me invert this. There we go, okay? I inverted my mask. What I did here, if you notice, is that my original image is not being edited. I did not delete the pixels. I hid the pixels, okay? They are hidden now. And if we use the logic behind the colors, it means that everything that is black will be hidden and everything that is white will be visible. But my original image here is not affected. Okay, so a layer mask is a separate layer that is linked to my original image that works with black and white to hide parts of my image. So for example, if in this part, I still have some excess of background here that I want to get rid of, I am going to make sure that I have the layer mask active. We can tell by these outlines over here, okay? This is my layer mask. And now I will work with the brush. My brush is the ninth tool over here, the brush tool, which I activate with B. And over here in the options bar, I can increase or reduce the size of my brush depending on what I want. And I can also play with the hardness. Now, if my hardness is at 0%, that means that the edges of my brush will be like blurry. And if I put my hardness at 100%, then the borders or the edges of my brush will be completely hard. So if, for example, in this one, I used feather, I am not going to choose a 100% hardness brush because my, like the brush will be super different from the edges or the effects that I want to accomplish. So for this one, I think I'll use 20 or so, okay? Now, over here we have the foreground and the background color, okay? The foreground in this case is the first square and the background is this one at the back, right? But if we follow the logic of black and white, then I cannot work with blue and red, right? So we need to reset the colors to black and white. So if I press D, I can do that, okay? Whatever colors I have for the background and the foreground color, if I press letter D, I will, those colors will be replaced with the originals. And if I want to quickly switch between these colors, I can click in this little icon or I can press X to switch the colors, right? So let me go back here to my layer mask. You have to make sure you are on your layer mask. So I need to use black to hide these pixels, right? So I'm going to do zoom in over here and I will start painting. Let me increase the opacity, hold on. And I will start painting over here to hide that excess of background. So this is another way in which you can refine your selections, right? What happens if I make a mistake like that? Or is more feathering or my brush is too, the hardness is super low? We can adjust the brush, but I can switch the color now to white so I can reveal those pixels again, okay? So black to hide, yes, and white to reveal again. So this way, my original image is not affected. And if I make mistakes, then I can just go back, okay? Now, the other thing we can do with the masks, let me show you the differences between the brushes. I will put it at 100%. Let me make this super big. And I will paint over here with black. Now, my brush is at 0% of hardness, and I'm going to paint in here so that you notice the difference between 100% hardness and 0% hardness, okay? And if I want to bring all this back, with white, I just paint over them and I reveal the pixels again. Now, the other thing we can do after we create our mask is that we can change the density of the mask, okay? Like all the things that are not selected, the density will be less. And as you can see, instead of being painted with black, it's painted with gray. So if we follow that logic, instead of using black, and if I use gray, for example, with my brush, instead of being completely hidden, the pixels here or my image will have like this transparency, okay? It's like opaque if we notice here. So we can accomplish this in two ways: by choosing a gray color, or by decreasing, having the same black, or by decreasing the opacity here in my options panel. So instead of completely hiding the pixels, they will have this transparency, okay? Now, let's go back here to the properties panel. I can also increase the feather of my selection, okay? What are these two options used for? To blend my object better with the layer that is below that. So if I already remove the background from this image, I can add another layer that I'm going to put below that. And with my paint bucket, let me choose dark purple for the background. And I'm going to fill this layer with purple, okay? Now, if I'm working here in my layer mask, let's check the density again, okay? All of the background will be like with transparency, okay? Like if I fill this with gray to have a different effect here on my selection. But I can also change the feather so that the edges of my selection are a little bit more blurry. So with these, we can have different effects in our compositions instead of the typical selection that we normally use to remove the backgrounds from the images, okay? And these applications, like working with gray or lowering the density or increasing the feather, can give us different results in our composition. So these are the layer masks. Finally, what we can do with this is that, for example, you no longer want the layer mask. You can do right click to disable the layer mask, or to completely delete the layer mask, okay? And that extra layer will be deleted from your original, but you will still have it as long as you don't rasterize this and you keep it as a smart object. But if you remember at the beginning, we created this selection, right? Where I removed the background. What you can do, for example, if you made this, if you want a selection that you want to bring back or that you want to use, instead of using another selection tool to use or to do the selection again, let me show you a trick. If you press Command, do you see how if I put the cursor on the layer thumbnail, this is the layer's name, but this is the layer thumbnail like the previews. If I leave my cursor there, I press Command, do you see how the cursor changes to that kind of square with kind of selection square? Keep it pressed and then click on the thumbnail, and that will select or create a selection around the object. This only works when you have a separate selection like this, where you have empty pixels. If your image does not have empty pixels like this one, if I press Command and click, the entire image will be selected, okay? So that's an extra tip if you want to use a preview selection. Just make sure you have empty pixels like this so you can bring back that selection and adjust it, okay? So these are layer masks.